Good evening and welcome to the May 10th, 2022 work session of the Gaston County Board of Commissioners. My name is Chad Brown. I serve as chairman of the board as well as represent the commission on the Riverbend Township. I would like to welcome our viewers and thank Spectrum Cable and AT&T for making this possible for our citizens. For our television audience, I would like to present your county commissioners, beginning on my far right.
Alan Fraley, Cherville Township.
Tracy Philbeck, Dallas Township.
Ronnie Worley, South Point Township.
Good evening, Bob Hovis, Crowders Mountain Township.
Kim Johnson, Gastonia Township.
And Tom Keeger, ditto.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, we'll move on to presentations and recommendation for the recommended FY 2022 and 2023 budget. I will now call on Dr. Kim Eagle as she prepares herself. I will talk about this as well. I want to welcome everybody to the May 10th Gaston County Board of Commissioners work session. During our work session this evening, we'll hear from our county manager, Dr. Eagle, as well as the recommended budget for 2023. She will be in the ask about the process that used to take for the feedback from the commissioners in the community and the departments of economic development. And Dr. Eagle, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've changed the microphone. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay, before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to share with you what materials you have at your seat, and then I'd like to make a special recognition. So to start with, you have there in front of you a copy of the recommended budget. That's this notebook. You have supplemental information that is color-coded. I'll refer to this as we move through the presentation. And then you have a copy of the slides. The book, as you look at the title, the cover page, I should say, is where I want to make a special recognition. If I could have Priscilla Loudon come forward. We collaborated with Highland Tech and their graphic arts program, and she designed the cover of your book. If you turn in the executive summary, you can see more information about Priscilla. We had another student also selected, Aiden Stanford, but I just wanted to officially say thank you very much. We were really excited about the opportunity to collaborate, and she's responsible for the graphic design tonight. So join me in thanking Priscilla. And you have your dad with you here tonight, correct? Yeah, and her father is with her here tonight as well. So thank you again very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so we'll move into the budget materials now. You have a copy of the slides there if you need to see some of the smaller print. So good evening, Chairman Brown, members of the Board of County Commission, county employees, and county residents. It's an honor and a privilege to serve as your county manager and present my recommended budget for fiscal year 2023. The total recommended budget is $361 million, and the general fund portion of that is $293 million. This is an increase of 8.5% from the current year budget, which aligns with the unprecedented levels of inflation, which now stands at over 8.5%. We're experiencing that here in the county and nationwide. I'm recommending a flat tax rate of 83 cents per $100 of assessed value and no use of fund balance to balance the budget. I remained incredibly grateful to my team, to our directors, to our budget team, and to you for your leadership and support throughout the entire process. The recommended budget maintains a conservative fiscal approach and achieves three broad goals. This budget funds only programs and initiatives that align with the Board of County Commissioners' top priorities. It funds only the county's core critical services and programs, and it absorbs the unprecedented levels of inflation we are currently experiencing. Tonight, I will provide an overview of the recommended budget and discuss some of the historic and economic trends that give our numbers context. Then I will go into more detail about the general operating budget, the Community Investment Fund, education allocations, and the proposed Gaston County Fire Protection Service District. Last, I will share information about our path forward. As you all know, these are the priorities that the board established back in 2013. These priorities, in addition to the county's adopted strategic plan, our departmental strategic plans, together provide the framework for my recommendation. In implementing your priorities, these are the outcomes on the screen that my recommended budget strives for. First of all, to maintain and improve our bond rating, to deliver competitive services, to expand our tax base and revenues, and to invest in infrastructure. This is a snapshot of the budget process this year. There were no major changes to our process except for the full implementation of the new capital plan. And we talked about that at your April strategy session. So moving on to an overview of the recommendations. I'll discuss these in more detail shortly, but my recommendation is that we absorb inflationary costs with existing revenues and maintain the current tax rate is essential to doing that. In terms of personnel, I'm not recommending any county-funded new positions, but I am recommending that we continue to fund the board-directed merit-based compensation plan. I'm recommending a 6% merit budget to be implemented at mid-year for a 3% budget impact compared to the current year. It's very important to me that we do not lose ground gained from the compensation study and stay competitive with our peer communities. But for unprecedented inflation, the merit budget recommendation would have been lower by half but for inflation. The recommended budget provides increases in operating and capital allocations for both Gaston County Schools and Gaston College and fulfills all debt service obligations. So this graphic is a summary of all funds for the recommended budget. $361 million for all funds net of transfers. You will see here that the general fund makes up over 3/4 of the county's budget, and that's what we'll focus on tonight. This includes a fund consolidation that is new for this budget year. We've consolidated the general fund, the health fund, the public assistance fund, and the building services fund. The community investment fund accounts for 11% of the budget and includes county debt service, school debt service, and capital projects that are over our $300,000 threshold. So in addition to your priorities that I covered earlier, these are the themes that I have emphasized and used to guide the formation of the recommendation. First is a one-stop shop for business and industry. This includes a streamlined plan review, permitting, and erosion control for building and development services, natural resources, and the City of Gastonia permitting, and online permitting for environmental health permits, and later for on-site waste and water. It also includes a proactive and reactive growth approach, and that includes initiatives such as the upcoming school bond issuance and planning for the public safety campus. Lastly, the budget recommendation includes initiatives for protecting our most vulnerable. Single-family housing rehabilitation program is in this category, planning for the use of our opioid settlement funds, planning for a foster care visitation center, library programming to mitigate learning delays from the pandemic, and the homelessness prevention committee work. So as an organization, in many ways, COVID and now inflation have simply been gut punches. A recession would be another gut punch. Despite these blows, we've responded. We are resilient, and we are still ready to serve the community. We serve the business community and industry. We serve our most vulnerable. We must be ready as an organization to serve all of those who rely on county services. So what does it mean to be ready to serve?
In 2020, we responded to a global pandemic with determination and grace. In 2021, we demonstrated our resilience, vaccinating residents, keeping our communities safe, and our economy moving forward. And now, 2022, we've endured so much. We've fought so hard, and we're ready to ascend to new heights. We were ready then, and we're ready now to ensure the coming growth is a benefit, not a burden.
I'm ready.
To make our in-person services even better than they were before the pandemic.
I'm ready.
To expand our outreach to Spanish-speaking and marginalized communities.
Estoy lista.
To improve the health and wellness of our residents.
I'm ready.
To grow our county without passing on the cost of inflation.
I'm ready.
At Gaston County, we're always ready.
So the recommended budget that you have before you tonight provides resources to ensure a readiness to address the needs of the community, accelerating growth, and economic challenges both known and unknown. Now we'll move into some of the trend information. As you all know, our county is experiencing significant growth that drives increases in demand for our services. This growth is also reflected in the number of building inspections and permits we are seeing. These figures do not include the City of Gastonia inspections and permits we're currently planning on taking on. We do, however, estimate that taking on the city will bring us approximately another 21,000 inspections and 4,500 total permits in addition to what you see here we're already doing. So what does this mean for county government and the services we provide to the residents? This chart is just a sample of workload measures for county departments to give you an idea of how we're impacted daily by growth. I will highlight just the increases that are over 50%, and this is comparing 2020 to 2021. The increases over 50% include gyms administered Narcan, child advocacy and shelter clients served, animal care placements, and natural resources acreage is serviced. So now more about inflation and regulatory requirements that are a part of this budget. We serve a growing high needs population in an area with historically low property values. This means we do more with less, given high inflation rates and flat property values in between revaluations. To put the cost of absorbed inflation and regulatory requirements into context, I have listed the FY23 budget impact for these items and the equivalent pennies associated with each. In the personnel category alone, state-mandated increases to employee retirement contributions and overtime changes from the state are equal to 1.4 cents that we are absorbing. In addition, the merit budget slide on this page is the inflation-driven portion only. As I said earlier, this amount strives to keep us from falling behind at the levels we were before our compensation study. On the operating side, general contracts, repairs, maintenance, and fuel prices are tied to inflationary costs equaling 2.4 cents. The county has experienced cost escalations in the price of fuel over the last 3 months, as everyone has, and we expect elevated prices to continue into FY23. As a result of growth and expanding service to reach all of our residents, the mileage driven in county vehicles is projected to increase 9%, while fuel costs are projected to increase at 54%. For example, the average price we paid for gasoline in July of 21 was $2.14 a gallon, and that number has jumped to $3.30, and that was as of March. For diesel fuel, the price we pay has increased from $3.05 in July to $4.90, and that's already a dated number. There was a record high today. Some of the contractual increases that are a part of the budget that we're absorbing is the contract for food at the jail, the public safety contract for New World, lawn maintenance, pretrial services, janitorial services, our Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, and others. So thinking about balancing the budget, these are some of the strategies that we used. Monitoring and updating our revenue projections throughout the entire process and refining those to the last minute. Not funding 96 requested new positions, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Reducing operating expenditures where possible, given the impact of inflation on our base level. Reducing the transfer to the county's community investment fund by eliminating or reducing requested capital projects and education capital allocations. And it is important to note, related to the transfer, that that amount in the recommended budget is less than the amount recommended by our financial advisors, but it's still an increase from the current year. So now a bit more about positions. You can see here on this slide, we evaluated 107 new position requests from our departments. Out of the 96 that were partially or fully supported by local funds or the general fund, I am recommending 0. Page 2 through 6 in your supplemental information packet, that's the packet with the color bar on the front, you can find additional detail related to the initiatives in the position. There's a description of the work that these individuals, if these positions were in the budget, would have been doing, and the impact on our community for not doing them. Now we'll move into the general fund. I've got some highlights here on this slide to share. As you recall, the general fund portion of the budget is $293 million. This is the 8.58% increase from the current budget, driven by those mandated costs from the state and inflationary increases that I've outlined previously. And I'm recommending a stable tax rate, and we are capturing sales tax growth. Over 80% of the general fund goes toward the core services of public safety, human services, and education. This graph shows our revenue sources for the general fund budget. Taxes, including property tax, sales tax, and other taxes, like excise taxes, make up 75% of the general fund revenue. And you can see the other categories listed there, for which additional detail is in your book. Property tax revenue is projected based on a total assessed value of $21.9 billion. The projection herein assumes a 98.5% collection rate. Using those figures, the calculated tax levy, including prior year taxes and interest and fees, is $181 million, a 6% increase in revenue over the current year. Here's a bit more about property tax. Currently, 1 cent on the property tax rate generates approximately $2 million in revenue. The median commercial property, as example, at the current tax rate, has a property tax bill of $1,444. So 1 cent on the median commercial property equates to $17.40. For comparison, the median residential property, which is valued at $130,000, at the current tax rate has a property tax bill of $1,083. 1 cent equates to $13.05. 60% of our residential parcels are valued at $200,000 or less, and 81% of all residential parcels are valued at $300,000 or less. Page 7 and 8 in the supplemental materials packet gives you additional information related to residential values in the county. Sales tax. Sales tax is traditionally much more volatile than property tax revenue. As a result, we have traditionally been very conservative when budgeting and projecting sales tax. For the FY21 budget, otherwise known as the COVID budget, we made the decision to budget less in sales tax due to the uncertainty surrounding the short-term effects of the pandemic. We do continue to see growth in sales tax, although at a somewhat slower rate, due in part to increases in inflation. The FY23 projected rate is still very realistic, yet it's conservative, to account for gains that we've seen in previous 2 years and to account for uncertainty in the market. This projection also takes into account the one-time stimulus funds that flowed into our economy during the pandemic and how that impacted sales tax receipts. User fees. The recommended budget continues the fee schedule methodology that the board approved in March of '21. This plan includes some user fee increases that were intentionally phased in based on your direction, using a 3-year plan to help blunt the impact of the increases. User fees are developed by taking the actual cost of service delivery and charging the actual amount as the price for the service. These projected revenues reflect the proposed unified permitting process that would include the city. And page 93 of your budget book, behind the fee schedule tab, you'll see additional information about user fees. So this graph summarizes general fund expenditures by function. More than 3/4 of expenditures, as I've mentioned before, are in public safety, human services, and education. Now we'll transition to the capital fund. So this will look very familiar. It is the same information that we discussed at your April strategy session on the CIP. We evaluated many projects. There are needs across this county when it comes to infrastructure to support growth. $300 million in potential capital projects were identified during our process. Of that $300 million, $160 million of those are included in the 5-year plan. So we now have a 5-year capital plan. I'll point out that the jail expansion project is included in the outer years of a full 10-year needs assessment. So it is outside of the scope of the 5-year capital plan. But I want to focus on year 1 of the capital plan, which is FY23. The investments in the recommended budget fall into 3 categories: facilities maintenance, repairs, and new construction, replacement of existing equipment or new equipment purchases, and land acquisition, design, and planning services. So you have a full-size copy of this slide. The font is kind of small on the screen, but these are the projects recommended for year 1 funding of the FY23 to 27 CIP. For additional detail, you can take a look at page 25 in the budget book behind the budget summary tab, and there is a written description of each project. To highlight a few, there are some important public safety investments in each of these categories that are core to our service delivery. So first, as we've been discussing for a while, the planning and design of the public safety campus is included. In addition, body-worn cameras and tasers are at the end of life for both county police and the sheriff's office. This is a contract renewal. And lastly, a fueling station for public safety to save travel time and ensure reserves is also included. We'll move into education. These charts show the allocations I'm recommending for both Gaston County Schools and Gaston College. So this chart is a comparison of current year funding with the requested amount followed by my recommendation. As you all know, the county is mandated to fund the ongoing capital and facility maintenance needs of the school facilities. The county has also historically provided operational funding to help address funding needs due to lack of adequate state funding. So I'm recommending a $1 million increase in the school's operating allocation, and there's also a $1 million increase in the capital allocation. The operating allocation focuses on teacher supplements and inflationary increases. For Gaston College, I'm recommending $250,000 increase in their operating allocation for inflationary increases and $100,000 in their capital allocation. I wanted to take just a moment to highlight some of the additional support for schools that the Board of County Commissioners provides. Debt service obligations on behalf of the schools, I'm just going to go through this list. School resource officers, the Commissioner's School of Excellence, and staff support from gyms are some examples of how you contribute to the functioning of the school system. In addition, there's a $1.5 million county secured grant that goes to support after-school programs in the school system. And lastly, the ARPA-funded water line extension projects you all recently approved will directly benefit county elementary schools. Without the federal ARPA dollars, these projects would have not been possible. Utilizing one-time dollars. I wanted to highlight for you, since I mentioned ARPA, the categories of outside funds that have come into the county over the course of the last couple of years. There are 4 main categories of one-time funds that the county has taken advantage of. First is the CARES Act. That was an award of $14.1 million for direct COVID response and has been fully expended. You can see the list of items there that money went to support. Next is the COVID-19 response using county funds. This came from you all before the CARES Act came about, and you allocated $7.8 million of county funds. Those have also been expended. The American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, brought $43 million, and the U.S. Treasury has some very strict parameters for spending the county's allocation. The award categories are listed in your supplemental packet on page 11, and you have already approved several priority water lines for schools, as I mentioned, and also the Cherryville Park design. In FY23, we will bring forward additional projects that are eligible based on the guidelines issued by the federal government. And I'll point out again that these are projects that would not be in the capital plan and would not be possible without the ARPA funds. Let me go back because I forgot to talk about opioids. All right. The opioid settlement funds. These are funds that can be spent on approved uses. Those uses are enumerated in the settlement MOU. Listed on the slide are just some examples. We have received no funds to date for opioid settlement. These funds will be distributed over a 16-year period, with our last distribution coming to Gaston County in 2038. And that total amount is $21.6 million. Now we'll transition to fire service. Staff has made tremendous progress creating the Fire Protection Service District for FY23. During our process last year, and when I was standing in front of you last year, we highlighted the VFD governance structure as an item on my future work list. So just a reminder of what you've done so far. In the summer of 21, we hired the North Carolina Fire Chief Consulting Group to help coordinate meetings with the fire departments and other stakeholders to analyze data and help us understand our current situation and make recommendations. In February of this year, you all passed a resolution to cap the fire tax rate across the district at 15 cents per $100 of valuation. And then in March of this year, you held a public hearing and approved the Fire Service Protection District. Then in April, the board approved the resolution that dissolved the Fire Advisory Board and created the new Gaston County Fire Commission. So the consultant has recommended 4 areas that would lead to greater consistency and accountability across the VFDs. First is providing a funding baseline to each VFD to ensure a base level of service and equipment at each department. Next, to provide consistent funds for service delivery enhancements annually. Then, to institute a planning process through a long-term capital improvement plan for fire apparatus replacement. And lastly, to provide consistent funding for grant matches and other multi-department joint projects. So the consultant has determined a rate of 11 cents will accomplish all of the recommendations. The methodology uses the FY 21-22 funding as a base, or a minimum of $250,000 annually, and represents no loss for the current departments. This rate also builds a small fund balance to fund capital projects, especially equipment, to be requested and reviewed by the new Fire Commission. This rate also provides the initial funding for a capital improvement fund for fire apparatus replacement and grant funding, which I believe I already mentioned. So here's a comparison. I know that's what you're eager to take a look at. If approved, the changes average out to a 1.55 cent increase across all fire departments to reach the 11 cent proposed Unified Service District tax rate. There are 3 districts that would see a decrease. Those are Ag Center, Community, and Lucia River Bend, and you can see the summary of the other departments there as well. That's also in your book. So next steps in this process. On June the 14th, the board will hold a public hearing to allow High Shoals, Lowell, and Ranlow to join the Fire Service District. In June, you are scheduled to appoint the members to the newly created Fire Commission. And then in August, we are tentatively scheduled to host the first Fire Commission meeting and begin work on bylaws to govern the newly formed district. So looking forward, because the work is always there to improve how we operate the county organization. I've identified 4 main areas for immediate work and analysis as we enter FY23. First, as I've already mentioned, is the streamlining of building and development service efforts into a one-stop shop format and finalize the work coming over from the city. Next is a review of emergency communications. This involves a review of peer governance structures and examination of the most efficient 911 and emergency communication service provision methods. Next is an evaluation of our museum funding and structure. This will involve a 6-month comprehensive review that will produce an action plan that explores the future of the museum to best preserve the history of the county and best maximizes the use of public resources. Next is a risk management evaluation. This will involve potential process improvements that would result in fewer vehicle and workplace accidents and increased levels of safety. And lastly, an evaluation of vehicle planning and purchasing. This will help us determine the most efficient methods for procuring vehicles, decreasing the average age of our fleet, and examine related internal policies. So to conclude, the budget document will be available for the public to review. It will be available on the website and in person at the main library in Gastonia and at the County Administration Building in downtown Gastonia. And on May 24th, we're scheduled for the budget public hearing and budget adoption here at your next scheduled business meeting. So finally, I know that was a lot of information, but as you know, it takes a tremendous amount of time and energy and hard work to put together a recommended budget and present it to you tonight. I would like to take just a moment to express my thanks. First, I would like to thank all of you as county commissioners for your input and your guidance throughout the whole process that started way back in the winter. I greatly appreciate your insight and support, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue throughout the coming year. I would also like to thank our wonderful budget staff. They need to stand up and be recognized. Don't be shy. Thank you. Thank you for your hard work, for some late nights, for the ability to analyze complicated data and put up with my questions. We have a really small budget staff, but they're very talented. And they're the best in the state, in my opinion. A big thank you is owed to the budget contacts that work within each of our 30 departments. They are in constant communication with budget and finance and human resources to make sure we are managing well and the directives and policies from my office are carried out in a fair, consistent way. Next, I would like to thank our communications department for their expertise in ensuring everything we do is clearly communicated, and for the wonderful budget video. I would also like to sincerely thank our finance and human resource staff. They provide expertise and they're very patient, and they're often behind the scenes. They support all of us with great skill and patience. And finally, I would like to thank our employees in the organization. Thank you for what you do to make Gaston County the best place to work, and for always providing our community with excellent public service every day. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. As we've heard about the recommended budget, are there any questions? Commissioner Hovis.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Dr. Eagle if she would to turn to page 30. This is our debt summary. This is our albatross that's been hanging around Gaston County's neck for quite a few years with the pent-up debt in terms of building the courthouse, the jail, school buildings, and all of this wonderful stuff that we needed so badly. And looking at this year 2030, we actually free up about 70% of our debt burden, if I'm looking at it correctly, present debt. Obviously, other debt may occur, but what I'm saying is based on what we're looking at today, snapshot of the picture today, that 9.4 million is a huge movement in those 6 years. So we must have a lot of projects that are coming to financing opportunities that are going to fall off the edge of the world in 6 years. And as a commissioner, I would like to know a summary, not a detail, but a summary of what those debts are, and on each of those debts, the year that it was incurred. In other words, did it happen in 95, did it happen in 2001, or whatever, and then when we retire it. Because those are probably, a big part of that are probably 50-year life cycles that we've probably paid for in 21, 22, 23 years, and then we're going to have a good ways on the other side of that debt that those won't recur. Others will, but those won't. And in order to understand how we plan for the future and deal with the CIP and do that long-range planning, which we didn't do in years past, that we need to do in years future, I think that would help the board and the public to understand what we as physically minded individuals who aren't trying to burden the public with a lot of debt, but at the same time be able to have the facilities and the resources to create those services present.
Thank you, Mr. Hovis. We would be happy to provide a summary of the project listing and the debt that's falling off. That's one significant advantage to the Community Investment Fund, being able to look at debt capacity over a period of years and take all of those factors into account. So we'll be happy to
And I know he has recommended, the conversation when he was with us before, he recommended a higher burden of debt, and I understand that. But at the same time, we need to know where we're at and then look at all these other needs and come up with our priority ranking for assessing which ones we want to jump into next.
And if I could follow up on that, Mr. Chairman, that's one reason it's so exciting to have a 5-year capital. Mr. Chairman, that's one reason it's so exciting to have a 5-year capital plan and to have a 10-year needs assessment. So we have as much opportunity as we can to be strategic about how we plan those against the debt capacity of the debt model.
Any other questions at this time? Commissioner Philbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking in the fee schedule. We're still collecting for the parking lot out here.
Yes, we are. It's a capital account.
Yeah, what page is that on? I just saw it. Brian Skiba should know that by heart.
93.
Okay, let's go. Can't be 93,
The book.
94, 95, 96. Anyway,
26.
I don't think we should, this is my opinion, I don't think we should charge people to park, period. I know we had discussion,
We were going to get rid of it.
I could have sworn we did, but I think we should. Again, you have to come here to do business. People are paying with their taxes, and then we're charging them to park. And not only that, the whole goal of this, I think, was a future parking deck. But if you look at how much we could never get enough money to do that. So I would recommend that we stop charging for that and take those monies and use them maybe for asphalt improvements or something of that nature when we need it. Because if I'm correct, when Chuck was here and we had this conversation, I think Sink as well, you can only use that money for
Capital.
some type of capital. So maybe move that money into anything that's needed to keep the parking lot up and just stop charging that.
And I found the page number, if I may jump in here. It's on the bottom of page 103. You have had a couple of conversations in recent years about the parking lot, and I will share with you what the challenge is. We have looked at that fund before I get into the challenges and isolated the interest earnings off of that, so you could have that available for other projects if you wanted to hold the principal balance in that account for the purposes of gaining that interest to use for different projects. That's
What page you said it was on? I'm sorry.
103 in the budget book. But herein lies the challenge while you look for that, Mr. Philbeck.
Okay.
There may be ways to mitigate this, but we have a challenge with employees and others taking up those parking places because they're so closely located to the buildings. So we would have to work through that. It's an operational challenge that we could work through if the board determined you wanted
I'm
to
just
stop
telling
charging.
employees that can't park there, this is for the public. If they do it 2 or 3 times, so you got to go. But
I hear you. Yeah.
But we've talked about this so much, I'd like for the board to make a decision, a final decision, hey, this is what we're going to do. Because I don't think, again, it's not serving the purpose that we intended for it. And I also think it's just another, you would not believe the complaints. I know I'm not the only one over parking. And I have to say I agree. So that's one. When you say absorb the inflation, how if we're not going to increase the tax rate, how we're going to, and we're not cutting any positions, we're going to increase merit pay, we're going to increase direct public allocations. So how are we going to absorb this inflation?
Yep. So I can give you more robust details in writing, but the short answer is we've experienced normal growth for new stuff being built that has been added to the tax roll of about 6% over the course of the last year. The sales tax is increasing, but it is still a conservative estimate. So those are 2 factors right there. We have gone through and scrubbed the operating budgets or anything that's not inflation related and backed off on that. I have asked budget staff to budget a vacancy rate. Lapsed salaries are an issue, and I know you're familiar with that term, and that's why I use that term. We know that not all 100% of positions are going to be filled with an individual 100% of the time. So we've gone through and budgeted a vacancy rate to minimize lapsed salary. So it's a combination of those things to balance the budget.
As far as, I'm not supportive of another $1 million for the school's operation. Again, I'm speaking for myself, not for the board. That is a state responsibility, number one. Our responsibility is towards capital. So what they're going to say at some point next year is, you're not adequately funding the capital to fix these schools because we keep giving money into the operations. Now, I get it. The reason for that is because they're going to say the state's not adequately funding teachers and things like that. But that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to capital, and we're not adequately funding it. So you just can't have it both ways. And as long as the school acknowledges that, they're going to publicly say that they're good with that. I'd like to know that they're good with that, because in the past we got pretty hammered for not adequately funding the capital side, but we were given millions and millions of dollars in the operation because that's what they wanted. But then they were giving us a hard time but that's what they wanted. They wanted us to fund the operation and not the capital. So I personally say raise the capital side of it and not the operation side. But I also know why they do that, because they can move it around and play with it more, but we still get hammered for not adequately funding operations.
Can I make a comment?
Yep.
In response? So we had a very similar conversation at the staff level related to the split between capital and operating. I asked how far back did the history go with the board funding supplements for teachers because of that very important issue, and trying to make sure at the same time, to your point, there's enough funding on the capital side, because what we don't want to do is use capital funds that are debt funds to do projects that shouldn't be debt funded, that are more regular maintenance. So
Okay,
we acknowledge the capital challenge. I'm sorry.
Okay, but according to the school, at least the last meeting I went to last year, they have hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, capital needs. We're giving $1 million. There's a huge disparity there. So I know this is a little bit political,
No.
but the school wants us to do the operations, which I don't have an issue with, but then we get hammered for the capital. So I would just like some type of acknowledgement that they're good with that, so in 2 or 3 months we're not hammered because we're not adequately funding capital.
And if I could add,
Is that fair enough,
yeah,
Doug?
it's fair to me. And to your point, I have a non-political comment related to the capital work. Being able to find enough contractors today to do the amount of work that's necessary, we couldn't push it out onto the street if we had the money in the capital. So we can't spend it all, even if we had it all on the capital side. So that's a balance, because the needs are great.
Their current fund balance, what's the actual number as of today?
Unencumbered.
Yeah, and just the history on that, we were up about 38 million in '07 before the last recession, and then spent down to about 2 million. So we've grown back up from 2 million to 19.
Okay. And, okay. I think I said this last time, I'll say it again. I do look forward to meeting you one-on-one, actually go through some of this. But I definitely support a tax cut. I do not support the budget as is. I think all through COVID, we haven't laid off any employees. We didn't furlough anyone. No one lost any of their pay as far as from the county that said, we're not going to pay you because of COVID or something of that nature. A lot of businesses suffered, but the county did not. We got millions and millions of dollars in state and federal monies. You're going to have a revow next year that could be 25-30% increase. At least that's what I'm hearing from the folks in the tax office. And last year we said we would do a tax decrease this year. And I get that there's some inflation, but the reason we're able to absorb that in my opinion, to a great degree, is because our budget continues to grow, our revenues continue to grow. If you look over the past 10 years, our revenue has grown, all of that. So for me, I think that's something we need to look at least have a conversation. And you're going to have a reval that's going to greatly increase our revenue. And I've had or heard some folks say, well, we'll just cut the tax rate next year. To me, that's kind of voodoo economics, in my opinion, in that we're going to raise your valuations, cut your tax. That's not real. To really get a real tax cut, I think we have an opportunity to do that next year. And I think without even harming this budget at all. Otherwise, you're going to go into next year, all the valuations are going to go up 25, 30%, and you're going to tell people you're going to cut their tax rate at the same time their values are going to go up no matter what. I wouldn't believe that. That's not real to me. If you tell me I got a tax cut and I'm still paying more, and everybody's going to pay more. So, but we'll have that conversation more, but I just wanted to state that position. And I do appreciate your hard work. I appreciate the work of those that put time and energy into this. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Keeger.
I don't say this very often, but I've got to agree almost 100% with everything Mr. Philbeck's just said.
Can you say that again?
No. At first, I want to thank the manager and the staff for the work that goes into this every year. I know it's not an easy task whatsoever, but if you would like, Mr. Philbeck, I'll sponsor a resolution with you to vote it up or down on the parking situation at the next meeting.
I would love to do that.
All right? I understand, Dr. Eagle, the problem with employees, but, and you know, we need to do a better job just in the parking lot at the county office now. I mean, I see employees in and out, and I see folks have to drive around 3 or 4 times to wait that are trying to come in to pay something or buy something. So that's the parking. I agree with the tax rate reduction. I'm not going to pretend I understand the budget like you and the budget staff, but this is my 24th or 25th one, so I think I know how to feel my way through pretty good. And with the monies that Mr. Philbeck talked about, with the increased revenue we're getting, with the development we're getting, and with the reval, it's just hard for me to comprehend that we can't drop it. And then, if you would, in the slide presentation, page 23, more property tax information. I guess maybe I'm taking it the wrong way, but I'm hearing if we only, the median house, I think you put it 250, 200,000. Okay. That the reduction for the owner of that property would be $13.05. It seems like we're going out of our way to make an excuse why we shouldn't, because it's only that little. That's how I'm taking it. And you know, even if we could, if we lowered it 1 cent, that's a savings, a tremendous savings for the 99 or what, 100,000 property owners now, 99,000. When you add that up cumulatively, that's a big number. It just seems like we're trying to make an excuse why not to lower the tax rate on that page, and maybe I'm taking it the wrong way.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman? So it's not intended to frame in that way at all, Mr. Keeger. I can understand how you would see that, but we are asked often to quantify pennies on the tax rate because of how the tax rate works, and often are asked about impacts on different levels, different areas of the community. So that's the reasoning behind it.
One last follow-up, question, I guess, direct, I don't know if you or Ray or who's going to answer this, but the requested and recommended 10 folks in the building and development areas,
I'd be happy to answer that.
that's an enterprise fund. I understand, I know
Yep.
how that
And
works.
I should have pointed that out.
But how do we have so much money in there that we can go out and hire 10 people?
That's an excellent question. We're not. That includes the 9 people coming from the city of Gastonia with their own revenue source. So we would bring the employees over from Gastonia, their cars, and the revenue would come with them because those are completely funded by user fees.
And that revenue that will follow them, is that in
Yes, sir.
perpetuity?
Yes, based on the memorandum of understanding that you all will eventually sign as we work through the details, yeah. The 10th one is at the landfill in the enterprise fund to help staff the scales because that's becoming difficult.
Well, again, thank you very much. Well, I was going to say ladies and gentlemen, but Matt, ladies and gentlemen, Matt, I know you worked in there too. Thank you.
Mr. Fraley.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to say something I don't say very often. I agree with Tom. The parking deck, I think we had good intentions when I think it was unanimous vote to do that, when we thought we were going to be able to collect enough money over time to build the parking deck. But once that project, fell apart, then I think it was time to stop collecting the money to pay. And I'd agree with that, and I would even sponsor to go in that direction. I also think that we need to look at a tax cut this year. I mean, with the high inflationary times that we're looking at, and all of our citizens are paying more for, food and gas and everything else. If there's ever one year we should be able to do it, and I think we're in the shape to do it, like Commissioner Philbeck said, I think without even really hurting this budget. I would like to look somewhere between 3 and 5 cents. I won't spend a little more time on it, but that's where I would be leaning. And if we have to push some project out to next year, we know we got a revow, so if we wait and cut it 10 cents next year, the citizens will potentially write a check for more money than they did the year before. I would like to see this 1 year where you actually sit down and write a check and you'll pay less than you did last year, and actually give the citizens a break. Not smoke and mirrors, but a real break. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions from this board? With that, I'll thank you and the staff for your hard work and your diligence that you put into this. I know you guys don't take it lightly when we try to brush fun at you guys, but it's been wonderful working with you this year. We've been through many a budget meeting, and so now you can take a deep breath, and we're almost to the finish line. I would like to see maybe some recommendations.
I'll go ahead. I'd just like a quick follow-up.
I would like to see some recommendations, maybe from the budget staff and yourself, Madam Manager, or maybe some of the possibilities of the way we could work on the parking fee funding and see how that would work, and try to work through that over the next month or so we can get that until we get to fruition. If that appeases the board to look at different ways, if that's okay. I don't know how everybody feels about that. I'm just speaking it, but just want to put that out there to see where we were. Commissioner Worley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Madam Manager, I'd just like for you to, if you will, you've heard about the possibility of a tax cut from several commissioners. If in fact we were to cut a penny, 2 pennies, or maybe 3, or I think Commissioner Fraley said the possibility of, he would recommend a 5. I'd want to know, show me where those cuts we would make, what would suffer, what departments would suffer. I mean, I've heard you in our meetings, we've talked about the inflation and where we've had increased costs, but I would like to see in the budget where 1, 2, or 3 cents would impact, and how we, if we were to entertain some percentage of the tax rate cut, where those impacts will be.
Sure. Would you like for me to speak to that now generally, and are you looking for something to come back? Or?
Well, just just some scenarios.
Sure,
uh,
sure. We would
some-
have to look at everything. 1 million, I mean, excuse me, 1 penny is 2 mil.
2 million.
So, $10 million for a nickel. It would be very important. My first filter is always the ability to deliver services. So I would do everything possible to avoid layoffs or furloughs. I would strive to protect the employees because they do the work every day, and protect the pay plan because we compete with the private sector. We compete with other municipalities, and we have to have the staff. That's the backbone. With that being said, we would need to look at everything that we fund. We would look at freezing the capital program, which would limit our ability to respond to growth, but we would look at the capital plan. We would look at the schools and the college, and we would take another look at the operating budget to see what the opportunities would be. So it would be a holistic approach, but I can put more refinement to that given more time.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, maybe I'd like maybe a little bit of an a la carte sort of menu, if you will, that say, okay, you cut 1 cent, and we're going to be looking at these programs, these capital projects. I certainly don't want to impact employees. I fully agree. We have, with the study, we have gotten ourselves to a pretty good baseline, although we're getting ready to see a lot of municipalities and counties surrounding us. We've heard from Charlotte Mecklenburg, the city of Charlotte raising police and firefighter pay 10% this year. That's real, and I would like to be able to pay those salaries. Our firefighters and our GMs and police officers and all employees, they deserve to be compensated as well. But we do. Those impacts are real, and even locally, I'm hearing municipalities raises of 8 to 10% locally. So we are competing with all of those municipalities and surrounding counties. So, but just sort of that scenario is okay. If 1 cent, if 2 cent, if 3, we're getting into this or these projects, and these are going to be impacted. We have had a considerable growth in revenue, and so I'd like to account for that.
Sure, we can definitely do that.
Just somewhere in the next few days, if we could get.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Being mindful, and as your manager, I need to say this, we would be very careful not to look at one-time money for ongoing expense, and do everything we could to protect the bond rating upgrade we just received, because that will cost us more in the future relative to interest rates and stepping into the market again in the fall with the funding for Greer Middle. But we'll put together a menu as you described.
Fine.
Be glad to.
That's good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Philbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the parking deck, I would like to vote on that at the next meeting. We can put that on the budget meeting. But I also agree with you in that we can vote whether to keep charging or not then, but then staff can have whatever time it needs to figure out what to do with the funds. Would that work, Dr. Eagle?
Depending on the pleasure of the board, we can, if you make the decision, we will implement.
Okay. Also, anytime we go to talk about tax cuts, it always, furloughs and all this craziness that makes it look horrible. I don't think you have to do any of that. This year's very, very unique. We could drop the tax rate to 79.5 cents. That's 3.5, I think that's 7 million. We literally could use fund balance one time, because next year you're looking at close to 30%. That's millions and millions of dollars that you could put right back into fund balance. You're still going to have to cut the tax rate again no matter what. So this idea that, you're going to have to cut this and cut that, and you don't have to do any of that. You could take $7 million out of the fund balance, pay for that tax cut this year, because next year you're going to have plenty of money to put it back double, triple fold if you want to, and you're still going to have to cut the tax rate. So I just want to make it clear, you don't have to have all of that. I think it's good. I agree with Commissioner Worley. I think that is a way to look at it, but also you don't even have to do any of that either. You can simply move the fund balance, pay it, have a tax cut, turn around next year. All of that's going to be back, and no matter what, you're going to have to cut the tax rate. So I just want to make sure there's a different way to look at that too. You don't have to cut positions. You can still do merit pay. You can still do everything you wanted to do and never even touch this budget. That's just my thought. Thank you.
Mr. Worley.
I would be very skeptical of taking money from fund balance again. As the first year in 50 years, we hadn't used any money to balance the budget. Was last year, and we're able not to take fund balance. And I would be scared of taking money from fund balance. We have got the AA plus rating, and I think immediately the Moody's would look at that and say, and they're pulling money right back out of their fund balance, or the county savings, if you will. And I think that could jeopardize our credit rating to do that at this time period. If I'm incorrect in that, I'd like for somebody to tell me. But
You're incorrect.
Any other questions before this board? Commissioner Hovis.
Just a comment, Mr. Chair, in reference to the parking. Obviously, that fee is there to create that level of control so that everybody doesn't migrate over to the paid spots from the other spots. I'd like to see a complete plan of how we're going to police that going forward so that our parking here adjacent to the courthouse isn't overrun by other people and not people doing their business in the courthouse. That's one of the reasons that fee is there, so you don't have to park 2 acres away. You can only park a half acre away. And you're 100% correct. This board is totally unanimous about doing away with that at some point in time, but we need to figure out what it's going to take to allow those parking spaces to be utilized appropriately by the citizens of the county who pay all this wonderful tax that we impose upon people. And at the same time, I think it is, Mr. Worley is correct in saying that we did something one year that we've never done. And I thought this board was proud of what we did last year by having a no tax increase and no money from fund balance, and quit borrowing from Peter to pay Paul and work forward. I don't disagree with anything that the other gentlemen have said about what we possibly could do. I disagree whether we should, because as we look at our checks and balances, we put ourselves, this coming tax year, the 22-23 year, is not really any different than the 21-23, except COVID's gone away for the most part. We don't know if it's coming back, but for the most part it's gone away. But at the same time, we could have done it last year. So I say, okay, what makes this budget year so significantly different? And even though we have reval that will go out to our residents in February of 2023, telling them what their tax valuation will be, not what their tax burden will be, but what their tax valuation will be come time to pay those for the next calendar year, which is due from, I think it's September the 1st through December the 31st. That's your payables period. None of those monies will be realized till half the budget year is gone. So our full amortization of that budget doesn't come back until 24, 25 in terms of our annual budget. And I have said, and I meant this sincerely, however we do that year, once reval comes back, and I think you're correct, we may be low in terms of what those numbers are, but whatever that number is going to be, it's going to be a big number, and it's going to have an effect. We need to be able to insulate and reciprocate to what I would consider a 6 to 9% growth over the 4 years of the reval, since the previous one to the current one. 6 to 9% is a modest growth for the county to receive. And then anything calculated back out of that goes back to revenue neutral to the taxpayer. Very similar to what I said when I was running before and I was voted against the budget because we only cut it 1 cent. We should have cut it more. So I say that because if we look at it from a fiduciary standpoint, it's better for us to think about that. I'm not saying it's the right answer, but it's an answer. And I like for everybody to think of it in those quantitative terms, because as we plan for a 5-year capital and 10-year capital plan, we've got to look beyond the day that we're in today and look at those cause and effects, because 4 years from next year, we'll be doing this again with another revow. And the most important chart that I saw in my conversation with the manager, if you look at those years going back to 2007, that chart that shows where we were each of those years in terms of the percentage of value each year, and you see it leveling off. We never got one section of, I think it was 5 years, we got above the value for 3 years. But everything else was 16 to 22% below the median value, the real value that we were assessing property tax on. And that's one of the things that hurts us as well. But, you know, it's a complex conversation. There's a lot of things that have been said here that are correct, but we need to try to plan for the future and those things. And I consider that to be my responsibility to the public, to look beyond those 5 minutes that I'm in and look out into the bigger picture. But that's my comments, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Fieldback.
I just wanted to add, because you asked what was the difference. Last year, we were told by the manager, it's on the video, I went and watched it before the meeting, we could cut the tax rate this year. That is why the board did not cut it last year. Just so you'll know, the board kept it flat because we were told we could cut it 2 or 3 cents this year, and then with the revow, we could cut it even more. So I just want to make it clear, that's why the budget was supported, and all of that is documented.
If I could add some context to that.
Please, ma'am.
And that conversation was in the context of barring no unforeseen circumstances like almost 9% inflation, being very prudent coming out of the pandemic. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, next steps for the budget process will be the budget public hearing and public budget adoption scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday, May 24th, here in the Gaston County Courthouse. I want to thank the manager, staff, for all the things that they're doing and what they have done throughout this process. And the next item on the agenda as we move forward, certificates of appreciation.
It is a great pleasure for the Gaston County Board of Commissioners to honor citizens who have unselfishly given of their time, talents, and skills and energies in service as an appointee to one of our various boards or commissions. This type of service is the foundation for citizen involvement in our county government and is helping shape the future of our community. We gratefully acknowledge the work of the following individuals, and a certificate of appreciation has been forwarded to them. Craig Collins, Jacob Horde, Sarah Kaprowski, Rashawn Newton, Bradley Overcash, Teresa Richardson, Anita Saunders, Lee Spock, Whaley Williams, Paige Willis, all members of the Family Advisory Board.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovis. There were no one signed up tonight for citizens' comments. Are there anything for other matters at this time before the board? Seeing none. Sorry? By the way, we have several members of our staff who will be in election, so good luck to each of you. Doesn't matter. Board members, you know what I'm talking about. You staff now. Tonight, you staff. This concludes our work session. for tonight. Our next regular meeting is Tuesday, May 24th, here in the Harley B. Gaston Public Forum Courthouse. We will hold a public hearing and receive the citizens' comments of the FY23 budget, and the board will consider adoption of the budget at that time. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please phone your comments to Donna S. Buff at 704-866-3196. Good night, Jubilation.